Hey everyone, welcome to the Painters Motivating Painters review video for January. We are in one full year as a group, so it's been a privilege and a pleasure reviewing all the models over the course of the year, and we've got a great selection now for the month of January, so we might as well get straight into it. This is going to be a two-part video, so if your model doesn't end up in the review, then no worries, we'll have the second part up as soon as possible. So I'm going to start off with Alessandro, and he has a Chaplin Terminator guy. I know things about 40k. Um, Wondering if the scrolls look too similar to the metallic part. I don't really. Um, I think it's fine. Um, I think that you can use fairly similar colors on those things because we know that they're going to be scrolls. Like I don't think it looks like the gold, but it doesn't look like the metallic part either. It looks like papery. Um, I think um, the the kind of backing, the surround for some of the parts could be a bit darker, like the way you have the gold kind of trim on the shoulder pads. You could have like a dark line around there just to distinguish it out, and then maybe actually have darker shadows on it for the skulls and things. But like that's not, it's still reading fine. I think the flamer on just on general notes because you didn't ask for anything else. The medals on the scepter, I wasn't sure on his like rod thing. Are the wings meant to be painted white or is it meant to be like a metallic and it's reflecting a really bright thing? Because it could be either, but it looks very monochrome if it's meant to be metallic reflections. Um, but you don't have any kind of other white painted stuff anywhere else, so that could have a little bit. You could kind of treat that a little bit differently, even if it is meant to be white. Some of it could have a bit more variation on it, and there's a couple of little patches just zooming in. Like I mean, probably fine, kind of looking at it with your own eye. But there's a few places where on the white there's like little bits of dried balls of dried paint or kind of chalkiness going on there. Like maybe you were working with it. White paint tends to be very bad for that in general. That kind of dries out. Parts of it can dry out on your paintbrush as you're applying it, and then you end up with like little spears of paint on there that you can take out. But again, that's more like it's only if someone zooms in, like you can online. I think the nozzle on his flamer looks a little bit weird to me. That like one of them's brass and one of them's gold, and there's no like weathering on it, like it's never been fired. I'm sure it's probably fine. Um, but it might look a bit better. And you could also definitely drill out those gun barrels. Vince would definitely want you to drill out the gun barrels because just it's one of those things where it immediately it's going to look better. It takes very little effort. Just drill a hole in there. It's much easier than trying to actually paint on like a fake hole like your Wile E. Coyote. I think that otherwise it's very iconic, like Chaplin color scheme. I think I really like the way you've done the lettering on all the scrolls and everything. I think that looks really good. Everything is kind of well distinguished out, and it's a nice simple scheme um, that reads very well for a model that can be like kind of busy. So great work on the model overall, and I'll pass it on to the other guys if they have anything they'd like to add.
Um, Not loads, to be honest. I think that the only other thing that I'd pick up on is that just in terms of like those little bits of cleanliness of painting. So sharper edge highlights, maybe a bit of recess shading just to tidy things up a little bit. There's a few areas where paint is spilling over from one area to another. But that's also a brush control thing that comes with more painting as you go, and it's something that you can't really practice. You just sort of get better as you paint more. So really, the advice is paint more, which not tough advice to follow. But it's a really nice sort of compositionally tight piece. Yeah.
Jim?
Yeah, not too much else to add really. I just thought that the red on the flamer and the red on the cloaks, like a lot brighter and more saturated than the red that you see in his eyes. So also this transfer that's down here is also super bright. So and that's actually like drawing quite a bit of focus. So if you could brighten up these two, I think they're gems that are up there, and his eyes, I think that would really, really help it just to bring that attention because that's a perfect triangle there, right where you need it. So like the color choices of red eyes and these rubies is bang on, but just try brightening those up a bit, and I think that will really, really help as well. But other than that, yeah, as the other guys said, mate, nice tones in the NMM as well. Enjoying those. So yeah, good stuff, Alessandro. Moving up to Mikhail Zido then. So you're very welcome. He wanted to practice some skin tones and some NMM gold on the jewelry. So how does it work with colors, light, shadows, and skin tones, and any other ideas to improve? So I thought the NMM was pretty good with this. You've got nice contrast to it. You've got good edge highlights, very deep shadows, very soft transitions. The bowl, I think, was probably the most successful. That looks really, really, really nice. These sort of brooches on her belt line are really good as well. So really enjoying those. It just look a little bit too yellow on the hair piece though, the stuff that's in her hair. But that might be the lighting from the photo, maybe a little bit. And then this highlight, where this shadow is on this wrist bracelet, that kind of, it might just be the angle of the photo, but that kind of looks like it's pointed to where the lighting situation is coming from. So like the placement of that shadow might be better off like underneath here, or this highlight would want to be a bit softer because it would be a secondary reflection. But again, mine, I think what you did with the necklace is pretty perfect, to be honest. So yeah, really enjoying the metals. What did I have for the skin? Nice tones in the skin, but the midriff looked a little like muddy, like this strip down her elbow here. Is throwing it a little bit. I think what you did with the hands, having these red tones in here and picking out the veins, is really nice. Super bright highlight on the shoulder, and it's all very creamy and smooth, so that's really cool. How you've got like purple in between the deep recesses is all really cool. It's just this one patch here of this ruddiness that's kind of throwing the whole thing off. I think if that was a softer, like pinky, magenta-y kind of shadow that you've got going up on her ribs here, that would be a lot nicer. But it's a nice like warm highlighted tone and cold shadow, so yeah, really good, mostly for the skin. You've done a fabulous job on the eyes as well. Let's just zoom in on those. Really nice irises, great shape to it, light catch in the right place, dark socket lines, everything. So yeah, really enjoying all of that. I did think though the contrast is very soft on it, so you could push the contrast a little bit more, but having said that, it does look like the picture is a bit overexposed, which would be blowing out some of those details. The way you can tell that is this dark shadow that's under her arm. That is not painted shadow, that's cast shadow from your lighting on the Mini. So just soften that lighting next time you take pictures of her, or anything for that matter. If you can see a shadow this harsh, then your lighting is not diffused enough, so you need to dial it back a bit. And then the other thing I had to say was I wasn't quite sure what this spatter material was. I think it's blood, because she's kind of vampiric a little bit and it looks like blood in the bowl. But just kind of the shape of it is a bit weird, and there's no like story of how it happened. So if it was spatter, you'd be better off like flicking it. This looks like you've stabbed it with a brush or some other hardish tool. And just like the shapes of it doesn't really sell blood spatter like absolutely 10 out of 10. So like flicking a brush or having blood for the blood god loaded on and sort of knock it against your finger, mask off any bits that you don't want to be covered, would be a good move. But yeah, other than that, really nice piece overall. Like what you did with the fabrics here, great contrast and great transitions. Hair looks beautiful as well. So yeah, great job, Michael. Matt.
Yeah, I really like this piece. I think my favorite thing about it is the kind of very limited palette, the way everything's so warm. Like she's got the red hair, she's got the red clothes, she's got the kind of warm gold and ruby, and then it's kind of blood themed, like she's some sort of blood priestessy thing. I think the blood splatter, I quite like it. I think it is a good way of breaking up kind of the area of her body, because it's always annoying with a female bust where you want it to have high contrast, but you want it to be really smooth and there's a lot of fiddling around. So I think it was a good idea. I think probably one of the things that would kind of aided a lot in the story is if you had a bit more variety to the actual blood. Like if the blood running out of her mouth was like darker or brighter or wetter looking, because it kind of looks like she got like shot with like a lot of blood at a set point in time a little while ago, and then it's all kind of clotted to the same extent. So if you had like a little bit more variety there, and maybe then it would kind of help us like, oh well, she was drinking the blood and then it spilled down, or she was killing the person to get the blood, and then we kind of know for it. But I think it looked good in terms of it's like having a bit of directionality to it. But again, it's a little bit confusing because there is so much blood involved in the miniature. And it's always hard to tell, you're trying to tell a story with just half of a woman. I think she looks really, really good. Great work. Look forward to seeing more in the future. Alex?
Yeah, the only things to really add for me, the skin is sort of um, it's all very much one tone. You've got very similar levels of highlight on the face as you do the lower abdomen. Sort of the you can get away with female skin with not having loads of contrast for that softer look, sort of softer features, less harsh sort of um, look. But if you go down that route, you sort of want to have the contrast across the model, sort of higher sort of values on the face compared to lower down, the areas that would be closer to the light source, just to sort of add the contrast in, because it is for me lacking in a little bit of contrast. And it also feels a little bit sort of, there could be a little bit more life in there. Some more sort of red around the cheeks, sort of around some other areas, some blues in darker shadows and things. You've got that really nice sort of glaze transition to the reds in the hands, so we can see that you can do it. So it's a little bit more in those areas that would maybe show those colors a bit, sort of ears, eye sockets, sort of cheeks, those sorts of places. That would also help to bring a bit of the focus in. So at the moment, the focus isn't necessarily on the face, just because it does fall a little bit sort of samey with all the rest of the skin. And on the NMM, I really like the color palette you've got. It really sells the gold. Could push the contrast just a touch to make it sparkle a bit more, but particularly those little sort of disky parts that are down on her belt, I think those look really nice. Just those slight glints, just to make it really sparkle. But I think that's really nice. Really sort of good direction with the metallics. Really strong. So move up to Tristan. So we've got sort of lava, OSL effects, and some NMM as well. And a little bit of sort of trouble with sort of chalkiness on some pigments. So on the model itself, I think that the OSL it's generally quite nice, quite sort of well achieved in terms of the light placements. You've got that nice sort of brightness. You've got that sort of almost reverse highlighting where you've got all the cast light in more or less the right places. There's a few places where it feels a little bit off, but for the most part, you've got quite a nice, strong, motivated lighting there. I think it could be a little bit more diffused in places, particularly on the back on these wings. It feels very stark, very sudden. So sort of feathering that out a little bit, just to sort of soften it out, because if he's got light coming from above, even if he's really close to that lava, it's not going to give that strong a sort of light that it's going to cast hard lights and hard shadows. But I really like the sort of way you've done the lava as well. It feels hot. It feels like it is the light source, as if it's sort of got that really red hot glow in there. I'm guessing that comes from those pigments, which works really well. I think in general the skin could be a little bit more interesting. It's basically one color of skin. So doing a little bit more in the sort of a bit higher contrast in a few places, it comes across a bit flat, but also maybe some more color variation. You've got a purple sort of skin tone. You can go up. It looks like you are going up to some pinks in some of the highlights. So you can maybe push that a bit further with a bit of sort of salmon tones, some blues in the shadows, just sort of create a little bit of variety. And a bit more focus into the face again, sort of what I was saying in the last one of you can highlight a bit higher on the face to bring in that focus. The non-metallics, I think, generally successful. I think you've got that nice sort of bright glint look. You've got this nice sort of high sort of value area that gives that sort of main reflection. And then you've got that reflected light as well, which is really nice to see in there. And it's a little bit stronger in the metal than it is in the surrounding areas, which makes sense. It's metal, it would reflect more. I'd just like to see a little bit of shadow between those two areas, though, just to help that contrast. So, like, take this front little part of his weapon here. You've got very bright, and then red and orange. So we can have a little bit of a dark shadow area between those two sort of primary reflection and secondary reflections, just to give that little bit more contrast and sell that metallic look just that little bit more. And just on the pigments, you said use a glaze medium to apply them, but by nature, you know, they will. Pigments are a chalky thing. They're not it's raw pigment. So it's sort of a bit of a fight against that. Sort of very specific products that are sold as like pigment fixers can help with that. But also, when you sort of varnish things over, an extra layer of maybe a matte varnish can help sort of harmonize that chalkiness away a little bit. Typically, something like an ultra matte varnish really helps with getting rid of that in the application. Sort of pigments can be applied really with water to apply them, and then a fixer afterwards to actually set it down in place and varnished to sort of help them set quite well in general. But yeah, Jim.
Yes, I think you did a good job on the NMM. I'd agree with that. Just to highlight this bit on the back, haha, choice of words, pun intended. This is the most successful piece of OSL, I'd say, and the reason for that is because you've got this dark shadow between the glow cast light and the skin tone. Wherever you see that dark shadow, that's where it looks right. You can tell straight away. Like this bit is like there's no dark shadow against any of it, which is why this isn't really selling as OSL. Besides the fact it's too bright, how much brighter this is than this. This is the sort of level that it wants to be down here, and this probably wants to be even softer, to be honest. But then if you go to the front, again on the abs here and on these sort of the biceps and the forearms, that's where it's most successful on the front, because again you've got these dark shadows around the glow cast. But if you paint a glow cast, you've got to put that dark shadow in around it before you go into the normal tone. So these areas here where it looks chalky and you've got the red and you haven't got that shadow before you go into the skin tone, that's what really sells OSL. So yeah, pick what you've done here and just replicate that across the model. And as you get higher up the model as well, this effect needs to become less and less and less. Yeah, because it's all sort of the same intensity right now. But yeah, great stab at it. You're early into the game, you said, with it, and I think you've done a wonderful job. Lovely brightness to it. Does yank a lot of attention down here, though, this being so super bright and saturated. Like when you like blur your eyes or shut your eyes away, open, whoomp, you're looking down at the base straight away. So you need to do something to bring some saturation and brightness back up to their head. Ideally, it's a bit tricky because of the sculpt, what it is, what material you've got to work with, and the scheme that you're working with here. But just a general note in future, like you need to get some saturated stuff going on up here as well, okay, to balance it out. But yeah, great job overall. Love the weapon. That looks really good. So yeah, that's all from me, Matt.
Yeah, I think everything's mostly been said. I'd just like to commend you on having a really good choice of model to do your OSL. A lot of time people try and like make OSL happen on like a I don't know, a guy who has a scope with a slide on it or something, but it wouldn't really happen that way in real life. The fact that this guy has wings that cast a shadow on parts of him, and then you get the light come from beneath, like it's perfect. And then also we kind of all have this image of big demon in hell, and the red is glowing and it's underlit. So you're kind of doing everything to set yourself up to succeed. And like Jim said, like it works really well, like on the back and where the wings are casting the shadow and that kind of thing. And also I really love much as it draws attention, I love that bit where the lava is like dripping off the base. Like I think that's one of the things that makes it like feel like it really is lava, in that you're like, oh, it's like melted out of wherever it is. It's a really cool touch. So thanks a million for that. Okay, up Adam Fillier with it's an ATST. I looked up a wiki article. I thought it was a Sentinel. But those are what like the Warhammer copies of this. It's a Star Wars thing, chicken robot. So looking for feedback on the weathering, too much, not enough. I think it's fairly spot on for me. Apart from maybe the feet, because like I think it's really good, and obviously Star Wars kind of has this kind of worn future feel to it, and there's a lot of like I like the weathering, the way you've applied it. I like how there's like dents and there's rust and there's all these different things. And I like how like lots of edges of things. I can imagine the cockpit has like been stripped away around the edges by leaves and branches and stuff hitting off it. Uh, but then by rights, then the feet should be like the most wrecked bit of it, because you think about it, it's a walker, so it's like it's kicking its way through the undergrowth and that kind of thing. So like all the edges should be completely stripped away on the feet, whereas it's kind of there's maybe even more wear up on the front, which makes sense in terms of like battle damage and like gunshots and things. But like obviously like the tracks of a tank, like they don't paint them because there's no point; it just gets stripped off immediately, and that's like what the tracks are in this model that has feet. Um, um, you could maybe have it, a little bit of on the back. I think it's not to do with the weathering, it's the camo. Like I really like the camo. I think it looks really good in terms of reading as camo, but not actually kind of obscuring the model. But it's also in some places a bit blocky, like in the back of the kind of chassis. Like if those fans that are on there weren't painted in camo, it might look a little bit better. Or and various moving parts, it's kind of weird. Like I don't think that would you would paint those because it would kind of gum it up or something like that. But it also just break up the area a little bit more if you had certain parts of it that are kind of, um, they were like, say, on the guns, for example, the barrels were added on after the whole model had been camoed, so it kind of makes sense, and give you a bit more variety on the model. I think the base is a little bit fake looking, in terms of there's like it's obviously cork. This is one of those things. Once you learn to recognize cork, it just looks like cork. It looks a little bit like almost kind of aquarium-y looking as well. The way you've kind of put it together. I tear up the cork into like much smaller chunks, or cover all the gaps in between it, and also the tufts as well. You can kind of see that some of them are just sitting on the ground, and it just looks. It doesn't look nearly as good as the model that's on it. Because the model is super well painted and well executed, and because it has the weathering, it's kind of telling the story of the world that it's in. But then the world that it's in on its base looks like much less convincing, basically. Um, but other than that, like I think it's really good. I think like it's better weathering than I could do. So if that's what you were going for on this piece, then fair play to you. Do you guys have anything you want to add on the chicken robot?
um, yeah, so the only thing for me, I really like it. It's really nicely painted. I think that the weathering and things on the sort of the corners and edges and things look really nice, particularly on that little handlebar at the top as well. For me, the ones on the front, that little highlight line you put under the sort of chipping to show that it's got that dimension to it, it's a little bit too sort of harsh. It could be just that little bit thinner and sharper to really make it sort of feel a little bit less cartoony, a little bit more sort of not painted, if that makes sense. Everything else is so nicely done that it sort of stands out to me, and yeah, I think there's some possible sort of missed opportunity as well in that the chipping can be chipping from one paint layer to the next paint layer, and then you can see a little bit below that to the metal or whatever, and some rust streaking and some dust and things, just to sort of I can understand holding back a little bit on it, um, but I think that especially with the nice sort of camo pattern you've got there, but it could take more for my preference at least.
I think it's about the right level. It's completely subjective, obviously. Your model, you weather it how you see fit. If I was to give one bit of advice, though, I'd say the big dents that have the big amounts of white in it, they need to go a lot darker than that brown tone that's there. That kind of, to me, looks like splattered mud kind of brown, rather than the metal is bent and is having a big shadow cast into it. Do you know what I mean? So, like, the shadow of the model itself is a lot darker than apparently a shadow that's been painted there through damage. You see what I mean? So this one, in fact, is this brown bit here is even a lighter shade than the one that it's painted on. Do you see what I mean? That's why these ones aren't selling very well. These aren't dark enough. So that's a good opportunity then to go in with these and cover slight bit of that white. You can go back and forward with damage. Don't just go, right, there's the dark bit, there's the light bit, done. You can go back and forth, get the white line thinner and thinner. It's a nice way to do it rather than trying to make a hyper thin, sharp line on the first try. So yeah, a bit back and forth there. and darkening it will really sell. But I like the way you've applied it, and it's on the edges and in the right place. I did think maybe, perhaps, however, this side panel could do with a bit more. That looks a bit too clean for me. Another example here, like how the damage isn't dark enough to really sell as a dent. So yeah, that would be my feedback. But I think it looks great overall. I love the camo pattern, and I don't care what anybody says. I think that cork on a base actually looks quite cool. It's my unpopular opinion, people, and Matt included. You can tell it's cork, yeah, but I still think it looks cool. I really like that base. If you painted up those tufts a bit with shades and dry brushing, that'd be a really, really nice base, from my opinion. Anyway, there we go. That's my thoughts on it. Thank you, Adam. So now we're going to move up. Excuse me, to Thomas. Working on a colour scheme for the army. Happy for the most part, but not sure about the red cloth and the shoulders. Any suggestions are welcome, and anything else. So red cloth and shoulders, not red cloth on the shoulders. Red cloth on the cowl thing is a good colour choice. Brings attention, stands out. I like it. Could just have a little bit more tonal value to it. That is to say, higher highlights. But I think it's fine being there. Just push the highlights a little more. So bit of a tricky one, red, but you can either like push it up through the orange spectrum or push it up through the pink and then up to white spectrum, whichever way you want to go. I think going the orange way would be nice for this because it will contrast nicely against the blue you've got in. But then when you've got it up to your highest value, go back in with a very, very thin red glaze or ink. And then when that's dried, do it again, because then it will look like really rich, vibrant red. But you've got to go through that process. You've got to take it up to like a very pale orange or a white, indeed, first, then hit it back down with the ink or glaze twice. You've got to do it twice, otherwise it will look weird. I don't know why, but that just is the way it is. So yeah, do that. You could possibly do that with this little bit of red that's poking out here as well. So that was it for the red. The black, I think, is, I hate to say the word, but it is flat. So that is a metal surface that's sort of curved and facing upwards. So that must be highlighted grey. So go up to grey with that. With the blendings, you could try and dry brush it or glaze it or layer it. Doesn't really matter. I keep clicking there trying to find another picture. I thought there was more pictures. But yeah, then with black, so 50% of the surface that you're painting still needs to remain as black. So basically, draw a line halfway in your mind, and then everything above that needs to be going towards grey. If you start the grey down further than that, it won't sell as black anymore. And then what you can do is you can glaze an interference colour in it, sort of in the bottom half or third of the blend. So you could do anything you want. Really doesn't matter. Blue, purple, green, doesn't matter. Just to give it a little bit more interest. It will still sell as black because 50% of it is black. But it's just a nice way to make it interesting. Then I had for this, I like the interesting tones on the armor, the variation and the way it's spread out and kind of moves around. There's loads of interest there. But the verdigris, I think this is, that's in like the metal, I think you've just overcooked that a schmite. So if you could get back in and tidy that up a little bit, I think that'll help. It's just, it's causing a bit too much confusion, like especially on these round bauble things on his chainmail. But overall, I think it's a cool scheme. I think it's an interesting set of color choices and that. The weapon looks nice with this kind of, I think it's supposed to be like a fleshy, like nurgly infusement that's gone in the weapon. And I like the corrosion, how you've got the browns and the oranges in there to show varying stages of rot and decay. I think that's really cool. All separated nicely. And then last thing I wanted to say was just a little bit too bright with your photo again. See the like the shadow that's on the base of the model, sort of underneath here where the chainmail is, and obviously the sickle is casting a shadow. That just means that your lighting is too bright. So it doesn't tell the true story of what we're actually looking at. But based on what we can see here, that is what I have to say, sir. So over to you, Matt.
Yeah, no, I really like this thing. I think it's an interesting kind of approach in that it's got he's in white armor, but most of the color is coming from like corrosion and from weird tentacle bits and things. And like Jim said, I definitely keep the red. Um, like there's a reason why AdMech, their whole thing is having these big red cowls and these kind of machinery bits. It's just a very eye-catching and interesting look. And without it, the model would like. I mean, what would your color scheme be then? It's like white, and then you've just got all these kind of accenty colors. So yeah, I think the red is it's a great shade, and I like that it's not too eye-catching because it's so worn down and weathered. If it was like a smooth, clean kind of new looking red, then it wouldn't kind of fit with the model and it would attract way too much attention up there. But the fact that you've added the grime in has kind of desaturated a bit so that it fits in with everything else, but it still draws your focus and it just looks really good in general. So, looking forward to seeing the rest of the army done up like this. Alex?
Yeah. For me, the red is. I think it's nicely painted. What you're doing with it is nice. For me, it is still that little bit too saturated though for the color palette. In terms of the armor is very very pastel. You've got these very desaturated colors everywhere. That's the only place where that saturation picks up. Sort of the saturation scale everywhere else is sort of here, and then you've got this way up here, and you can have a more saturated area as your sort of focus. But just with this color scheme, I think it would balance a bit more and feel that little bit more harmonious if it wasn't quite as high as it is. It's really nitpicky. That's not to say don't paint it like that. I think it looks nice. The I really really like these sort of different color infusions you've got across the sort of armor, sort of a bit like what Matt was saying there about sort of all that sort of white, but all the color comes from everything else that you've got going. All these sort of little subtle glazes and subtle shifts of color, they look really really nice. I do see a mold line running down that sort of front hand and sort of weapon though. It's just tidying up on the sort of prep work, but I think it's a really 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 nice sort of scheme, a really nice model, and it'll look really, really nice as a sort of a full army without being sort of mind-bendingly difficult to sort of churn out for every single one. It looks like it'll be fun to work through, which is always a nice thing for an army. Not that I've painted many of them. Let me move up to Mr. Jim Norfolk with sort of a little sort of tank guy. And just going for sort of a little bit more weathering, cleaner up top, and more battered down low. So for me, I think this is really, really nicely painted. I think it's really strong. I think everything is very, not in the unweathered sense. I think the weathering is nice, but it's very cleanly painted. Everything is sort of very sharp. Everything's well defined. I think the color choices are really nice. They sort of balance quite well. With that though, I find that it lacks a little bit of focus. There's no one spot. Sort of my eyes dance about the model quite a lot. Not in a sort of going from element to element that are sort of picked out to then draw the focus in and sort of eventually settle on one point. I'm not really settling anywhere. I think that not necessarily, it's a big model, so it's hard to do anyway. So it's not the biggest issue, but it's just something to consider there. Now, loaded question. All the little markings and everything on there. Decals?
Yes, they're decals because this is for tabletop. This is the first.
Yep.
This
No,
is the
that's
first part of
fine.
an army.
I was going to say, my first glance at them, I thought they were freehand because of how well you've integrated them. So
Oh, really?
it was more of a roundabout way of complimenting you.
Thank you very much.
So the chipping and things and the sort of shading on them and the weathering through them, they're sort of really really well integrated. I assume you've done some sort of either a sort of gloss followed by matte varnish, sort of, or something similar to get that little raised edge, that shiny edge that you sometimes get to disappear as well, because I can't really see that very much in them, which is really nice to see. I think that the weathering, I think what you've done is nice. I like the dust at the bottom. I really really like that. I like the chipping. I think the chipping could be a little bit more sort of, you've got a little bit of that sort of paint to metal, I think a little bit more of that, maybe some rust streaking there as well. And I do like the idea of going from sort of dirty at the bottom a bit more sort of clean at top. And you've got some areas where you've got some weathering up top, but I'd still like to see just a little bit more. Again, your model, your choice. But for me, for example, the like gun barrels, you could have some heat bloom on there and things, just to bring a little bit more of stuff up top as well. And normally I wouldn't talk about the figure in a big tank, but since you've included the close up, I'd like to see a little bit more contrast in the skin. Personally, just a little bit sort of brighter. Just again, maybe to give that slight sort of focal sort of zoom in, if you wanted to be the person that is. But overall, I think it's really, really nice. Really, really nice.
Thanks, man. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I think it's great. Like, yeah, and totally, it's a great solution to the white problem. Where if you're using a lot of white, you've got most of your interest added through pigment powders and other stuff, rather than meticulously putting in grades of white onto every single bit. So I think that's very clever. The richness of the red is great. I love all the variety where you have the hazard stripes at the front and stuff as well. And to me, it reads perfectly as like this is a tank that's seen a lot of recent heavy combat, as opposed to something that's been sitting around forever decaying, if that's what you're going for. Is it for 30k or 40k?
40k. I'm doing Space Marines, so yes, 40.
Very good. And then I was gonna say again, like if considering it's for an army, like this is like I wouldn't bother saying this normally, but if you wanted to do something, if like a display piece of this, there's the odd place where you have kind of large dents and chips like under that eagle head thing, and then a couple other places where it's such a big hole that it kind of ends up reading like flat weirdly, in that to have that deep a shadow it must be punching through like several inches of armor. So I don't know if you could do something to have like
A bit
like
of grey
some
in there or something.
yeah, or like I mean that's probably you're doing like trompe l'oeil kind of thing to be like, oh, there's a hidden area in here. But even just like you could have like a layer of paint breaking it up just so it's not such a big hole. Because like obviously the bigger the hole is, the more light can actually get in to let you see what's in there. And you get away with it in a bunch of other places. And again for me, uh the weakest part, which is the least relevant part of the whole thing, is the dude on top. And I think his gun looks like not up to the same standard as most of the rest of the figure in terms of contrast. And mostly though, as soon as I looked at him, I just started getting really annoyed because I was like, why is he up there? What's he doing? Like he's got his bolter, but there's like two bolters fixed to the outside of the thing. And you're like, okay, well, maybe he's like there's someone nearby he needs to shoot. And you're like, well then why doesn't he have his helmet on? And why does he have binoculars? Like, what's he doing? What is he doing up there? Yeah, and again, I don't think you need to do the weathering on him as well because he's like inside the tank. It'll just save you a little. Just take him off. But anyway, it's your model. Do whatever you like. I really love as well that the directionality on a lot of the chipping, like especially at the front of the kind of dozer bits where it looks exactly like it's been plowing through things. I think I really love this tank. So great job all around.
Thank you guys. Thank you very much. Yeah, I might take the dude out. He's not glued in. I might just replace him with some missiles because he's the thing I like least about it as well. So I'm glad you said that.
Those things where you're like, yeah, it's an easy solution for this. Go away, you.
Sack him off and put a SAM site in the top instead. There we go.
This is more. All right, cool. Now, we've got a Sigrun bust from Black Crow by Ken Brate. Ken Brate. Ken. First bust, first female figure. Looking for general comments and suggestions. Biggest issue was working on the skin tone. Yep. And trouble getting smooth transitions and contrast. Yep, it's very hard to get smooth transitions and contrast in one, and especially on a female figure, and especially on a bust, and especially on one of these half busts where you have to do like so much other stuff as well. So fair play, like taking on this thing. It's kind of like exponentially more work when you're doing a bust. If it's like got more body and then if it's female, you end up doing like 9 times as much effort. So super challenging, and I think you've done a very good job in terms of the skin, particularly on the face for if that's your focus for it. I think it's got a nice kind of smoothness to it. I think you could have, and the contrast for me on the face is quite good because it looks like she's wearing kind of pale makeup, which tends to like hide a lot of shadows in your eyes and that kind of thing. And obviously the lipstick kind of is a dead giveaway there. You could have a little bit more extreme highlight, like you have a little bit on like the lips and around the chin, but like the top of the cheekbone and like the inside of the eyelid and like the side of the nose, you can have like a really really small area where you're getting like a glistening highlight thing because skin has just like refraction happening inside the skin. That'll do that. Like makeup would technically cover it up, but it just looks good to have that on there. Um, I think the challenging piece is the arms, which again wouldn't be a challenge if she was just a head. So yeah, that's part of the thing. It's very hard to get it to look like it's sculpted realistically in terms of how like muscular it is, which actually people don't have huge shadows cast by like their delts and their biceps and things when they're like not bodybuilders. Um, so that makes it kind of hard. I think the biggest problem you have is though some of the shadows, like say in her elbow, like the shadows cast by her bicep, but it's like extending up from there. Like there's no, you're kind of like shadowed the whole. It's like this is where you're expecting the shadow and gone up and down, whereas it should only go down, and also it should just be generally even less than what you've got. You could probably do a lot more of it through kind of tonal variation of the skin, where you give her like some kind of blue veinage, like slightly in the elbows, or make it a bit redder or whatever. Because it is very very hard to sell that kind of like muscle definition when it's not ridiculously defined in the sculpt already. I think the cast shadow, the shadow on the inside of the arm, I don't know how much of that painted on, but that's the kind of thing. Like your arm will cast a shadow. The whole arm is going to cast a much bigger shadow than like the individual muscles that make up the arm. So kind of follow that guide and just kind of think as well if you had a brighter highlight like in a very small area like on a line on the bicep, almost like in an NMM kind of highlight thing, uh, that would kind of give you a bit more dimensionality without having to worry so much about the shadows that aren't going to be that deep on that kind of an arm. Um, I'd watch out for like you've got little balls of paint. I don't know. I'm not gonna say this all the time. Get little balls of paint in the odd place, like right under her like deltoid thing there. A couple other places. It always happens with skin tones because they have a lot of white in them and you're working with them for a long time. Um, so you can just take them off with like a razor blade. And I quite like the way you've done like the shadows of like up around her eyes. I think that's got like a nice little bit of detail that's obviously painted on. As the skin's focus, I'm not going to go into the other bits too much. I think the metal, like the metallic metal, looks really good. And I like the color choices all around and the composition. I think the shield was really like screaming for some freehand to be like the focal point of the rear view of the model. Like anything would be good there. And some sort of basic shading on the inside of the shield and the cape, just because it looks it's kind of gonna throw things off. Like you might be like, okay, cool. I don't want to put too much effort into the inside of the shield, but it looks like a painted piece of plastic, and the rest of her is looking more like a real woman. And it's kind of you need to have a certain amount of um, time put into every element because people are going to see them all, which again is why busts like this are so much more hassle. Um, but yeah, great work. I totally appreciate how much time and effort these things take, and I think in terms of focusing on doing female skin on this, you're making great headway. Thanks a million. Does anyone have anything they want to add?
Um, yeah, so sort of two sort of things for me is just I think the color choice for the inside of the shield is not great compositionally. It's sort of in general you're working with a very cold palette. You know the blues, the purple of the cloak is a cold purple. The sort of greens, it's quite a not overly warm skin tone. I wouldn't say it's cold, but it's not overly warm. And then it's really the only area where, I mean, the tips of the feathers, but it's the only area where there's a big sort of area of a warmer color. And because the arm is quite bright as well, that's where my focus is being drawn more than anything else. It's where I tend to sort of look when I relax my eyes. It's a very small thing though. I think the metal's just at this scale. I think you said it was your first bust, so it's not something to be sort of super stressed about the first time you're sort of or second bust, sorry, first female figure, but sort of the second time sort of having a crack at busts at this scale, a little bit more sort of variation in the metals, sort of glazing some. A lot of people get in their head that busts have to be NMM to look good because it's a bigger scale and things. It's not true. I think true metallic can work really well. I think that a lot of people see busts painted by high level painters, like display painters and competition painters, a lot, so see them as this big scary thing. I know I did when I first started painting busts, but true metallics work really well. Just with that sort of non-metallic shading, some color interference sort of glazed in, just to give it that little bit. They're such big areas on busts. I mean, everything's a big area on a bust, but the metallics could do with just a little bit more sort of attention. But sort of somewhere that did have quite a lot of attention. I think it's probably one of the standout areas for me is the eyes. I think they're really nicely painted, really delicately painted, really detailed, and really really sharp. I think that looks they're very striking. Sort of on the sort of shot that you've done, where it's a bit more zoomed in on the top of the model. That's immediately where the eye gets drawn. Um, that's sort of where you can see them that little bit more clearly. That's an immediate focal point for me with that sort of quite bright blue. My advice going forward would be on even at this scale of model, you can be a little bit unrealistic with the eyes. Go brighter than you think you need to go. I find height if you can do a little. I know it's tricky because they are so small even on these big models, but if you can do a little highlight, almost like a gem style highlight on the sort of opposite side to your glint highlight for the iris, and infuse a little bit of a yellow. Use like a yellow tone to do that highlight, like an ice yellow or something like that, or an ivory, just to get that little bit of sort of slightly almost unnatural brightness there, just to make it that little bit more focused. The eyes are so small. To make them glint, we need to play with the artistry a little bit. But overall, I think it's a really nice sort of piece.
Yeah, much agreed. I just wanted to congratulate you on that really strawy blonde coloured hair. I think you did a really nice job of that. It's a tough thing to paint is blonde hair, and I think you did a great job on that. I think also next time you paint fur, try and get this is not your fault because this is just a horrible sculpt of fur. I think they all are, just varying degrees of awful. But this one is really, really not a pretty sculpt of fur. But to make it more interesting, find a pattern, Google a furry animal, get a pattern, and that's pretty much the only thing you can do with it. I don't think you did a terrible thing with this. There is some variation to it. But yeah, just general rule I think for fur should be widely accepted is paint a pattern on it, for Christ's sake.
The only acceptable sculpt of fur is a big flat area that you can do your own texture on.
Yes, those are the ones. It does look slightly better than GW fur, I'll give you that. That's probably
Yeah.
the worst of all. And yeah, maybe next time you go for leather, try and bring a bit more variety to the leather. That's looking like it could use a lot more texture to it. Like the green looks more textured, so do the blue fabrics. So yeah, that would be my thoughts on it. But great job for an early bust, mate. Really, really looking good. Especially as Alex said, those eyes. There's really a lot of feeling in them. So yeah, well done, Ken. So moving up next to Andrew. Congratulations for the newborn. Hope everything's well. I see you doesn't sound good, so I hope everything's well there. First of all, so trying to explore a more painterly style. Looking for general feedback on the face, and what a minging, disgusting, ugly face you've painted there, and I think that's deliberate. And for these reasons, I really, really like it. I really, really like this. Yeah, it gives him such a sickly and infectious feel to him. Putting green in the eyes is very, very unusual. And I think you've absolutely nailed it because he's not a big scale, and you've done wonderful work to get that so tidy and even get a specular glint in there. The redness around the eyes, he looks foul. These manky, menacing, filthy teeth. It even looks as if his lips are dry and cracked because that is how ill he is. He looks really plaguey and horrible, and it has this amazing contrast with like the fun, almost gestury outfit that he's wearing. So like, yeah, just the whole play on the whole thing, I just really, really thoroughly enjoyed it. I think you did a great, great job on this face. Really, really nice. If I was gonna like pick something to push you a little bit further with everything, it's just to define the edges of things. So like a darker line where materials meet, that little occlusion shadow, so you can see it like between the boots and the pants like leg. Really nice dark line there around this neck here, where they're just everywhere. Wherever two surfaces or materials meet, just super dark thin line. Shades are perfect for this, or an ink. Just watch out because some inks can be a bit glossy. So you'll have to matte that down afterwards, because if you have like glossy occlusion shadows, it instantly falls apart because you're seeing then light in a very deliberate shadow. So just watch out with inks, you might have to matte them down. But yeah, super fun piece, really, really cool. And also massive congratulations on that ridiculously tiny gem on his belt, which you've painted supremely beautifully. So just pretty amazing all round, mate. Considering the scale of it, I love the whole theme, color, and the he just repulses me, and I know that was deliberate. So, great job, Andrew. I love it. Matt, I think next.
Yeah, I very much agree. Everything about the color scheme really works for me, and I like as well. I just want to draw attention to the base. Like, some often we get such like uninteresting bases, and we all tend to do it. And you're just like, hey, yeah, no, his base is going to be like all of these colors ever, because why not? It's more fun. And he looks like a fun model. Thanks a million for spitting him in.
As above, really. I think it's largely all been covered. I think my besides what Jim said, my only complaint would be, nicer photos, but you've got the excuse of all excuses, so
Yeah.
I don't think I can really pull you up on that. So we'll just move swiftly on to Michael Smith. Trying to do sort of an heavy metal style. And sort of just general feedback and looking at the sort of plasma glow as well. So overall, I think it's really nice. I think it hits that sort of very clean Games Workshop style without being super like try hard copy the box art. I think in a good way, that is. A box art of this type of model would have wouldn't have anywhere near as much sort of volumetric contrast in sort of a lot of the panels. It would be a little bit more flat, whereas in this it gives it that not quite all the way to non-metallic sort of bright in your face metal, but that sort of metallic-y sort of lacquered varnished sort of big machine type of look, which I think works really well. I think it's a really nice sort of arm panel. I think the edge highlights, again, sort of having them be stronger in the middle of panels and things, again, it gives that sort of element of reflectivity a bit more than just line of highlight that you get on an heavy metal box art, which is nice to see. I think it works really well. Really like that armor. I think you could go further in terms of weathering it, in that you don't really have any at the moment. I'd like to see some. Even if you sort of justify it as, that metal is painted really well, you don't want to sort of mess with that too much. You can justify it as it's, future space metal that doesn't ding up. I'd like to see some weathering on the decals in one way or another. Those elements can have some paint chipping, show the underneath colors and things, sort of give a little bit more story. It's a big fighty robot with a plasma gun and a flamethrower. It's not going to be pristine condition. Speaking of the flamethrower, I think the OSL on the hand works quite nicely. I don't think that's sort of an issue at all. I think it could be, I think that some of the placement of the lights could be a little bit sort of more finely placed, but it all works, it all sells. It's not offensive to the eye at all in where I think it could be a little bit more placed. I think it works really well. And the plasma glow, so it sort of feels a bit washed out. I don't necessarily think it is. I can see why you say it doesn't glow as much. And for me, that's coming from you've not gone bright enough. You've not given it that hot spotting. The source isn't obvious. The color that you've done your sort of glazing to get that glow is compared to the color of the coils themselves. There's not that much difference there. There's a little bit, but I think that's more from having glazed it over the blue and that underlying blue showing through, rather than an active choice of a darker color. So I think it's as simple as going brighter with the coils. Some people like a style where they highlight towards that where that sort of corner is and make that hot spot. Other people will sort of highlight into the recesses with like a white. I think both styles work. To be honest, however you think it's going to look nice works. You've got that little bit of white at the bottom, which sort of gives that hot spotting, but more please. Where you've got that glow onto the sort of little, I don't know if 40k law, so the little guide next to him. Is it a blood letter? I'm gonna guess.
Letter, yeah, it is. Yeah.
I'll consider that a win.
Maximum points.
That glow, the glow there works. I think it looks nice. But where it's glowing onto the gun itself, it needs a little bit more motivation for the light. I could cover up the photo on the photo. If I cover up the gun, the OSL that's on the blood letter is really, really nice. It sells really, really well. So even without seeing the light source there, you can see that it's a glow. So it's just a little bit more white, a little bit more sort of highlight to really show that hotspot, that brightness. The light source of OSL needs to be crazy bright for it to sell well. If you've got a model that's painted with so much sort of highlighting around it. Jim?
Yeah, I'm going to stick with the gun while you're at it. I think the best way to fix this, two ways. More of a run up to this white. I think they look best when they're done in this style, where you have the brighter bit along this bottom edge. So just more of a running highlight up to that white. And then, as I said before, and I'll probably say again, you need a darker shadow around the edge. There's a little bit of there, it looks, but if you darken that down, it wants to be almost like these dark color of the armor panels. It needs to be that dark. It is that bright, and he is well lit, so this is going to be crazy bright. It would have to cast a deeper shadow than what's here, which is I think why it's looking a little bit more washed out. Other places where the OSL works, there's very clear dark shadows, so you must have that. You can't have the green blend to the brighter blue. Yeah, it's got to be the darker one. And I think you'll have nailed it. I think it looked wicked. Great story with this, by the way. And then I'm going to have to do something I don't do at all, I don't think, generally, and that's disagree with Alex, because I don't think you need to weather anything if you don't want to. It looks awesome, but to make the decals like settle in, you could shade them. So like the ultramarine logo at the top, you can see is very clearly traveling between an area of shadow and an area of highlight. So you've got to shade the decals in as well. Same for this skull. You can see the highlight is starting halfway through like the skull on this knee pad. So if you were just to shade that down, that would instantly make it settle better. Same with all of them. They're all split, but this is why they're standing out so much. So if you were to shade them, you don't necessarily have to weather them, but integrate them into the model that way. Let's have a look at the one on his arm as well, if I can find a reasonable picture. So same again, it's cut in between the shadows, which is why they're standing out and triggering Alex so badly. So yeah, just shade the beauties, mate. Null will probably be the easiest thing. Just very, very gentle, or perhaps your airbrush. Looks like you've airbrushed this. If not, amazing brushwork. So yeah, that's all I got to say. Crisp, clean, beautiful. Keep it that way. It looks lovely. And who doesn't love moshing a blood letter into the floor before you blow its brains out? Sound. Love it, man. Very good. Michael? Michael?
Yeah.
You're not Michael. Who's hell's Michael?
Yeah, he's Michael. Yeah, no, for me, I think the biggest problem for me with the OSL isn't actually do with contrast or anything. It's that the way it's lit, you have it, it's glowing in areas where it couldn't glow. If that makes sense. So like you have panels that are just around the plasma coil that are glowing, whereas so if you look at say like the area in between the plasma coil and the skull thing, like the side of the skull thing should glow, and all the panels that are facing outward shouldn't glow because they can only reflect light that's incident on them. So if they're glowing, if they're turned green, it means that the light is coming from outside the plasma gun where you put your airbrush. So it looks to me just like that whole area has been airbrushed green. So making it run down darker, or even just to changing it to blue, would immediately make it look much more like a light source and less like that area is just painted in green. I think that the OSL on the hand is actually class. I am triggered by this flamethrower thing. I just personally dislike those things where it looks like you have a big thing of cotton wool coming out of your gun. Uh, I think you could probably stop the flame just past the area where it turns yellow, and it would look better because the way you've done the OSL is super convincing, super interesting, cool looking. And then I've never really seen like smoke and fire in a large volume that I think is done convincingly. So you're better off, in my book, just having like a small lick of flame, and then having the light kind of showing that it's, maybe there was a burst of flame area, it's gone out. Just because it ends up like, there's just something very different looking about this added on bit and everything else. And the base is really cool. I love how you got your tufts. Actually, they've got like different kinds of grass, and the tufts are like hidden in under clumpier foliage and stuff, and the bloodletter's like also buried in the ground. It's really really nice basing. So good work on that, and the model as well. It's a great take on this kind of dreadnought guy. So thanks a million, Michael. We got Robin and another high elf. I always end up reviewing Robin and a high elf. So I'm going to try and do this quickly, but I also wrote a lot of stuff, so I'm just going to talk really fast. Sorry, Robin. So medals on it look great. They've always looked great. Keep it up. It's nice on the magenta fabric that you're adding the texture on. It could have a little bit more highlight, like the way you were kind of between two minds about how much highlight to have on there. You can do that thing where the texture disappears in the highlight area because it's been like blown out. I think that tends to look very good if you're willing to put in that extra little bit of effort on there. And I think one of the problems as well with the banner and the kind of texture you've got on it, is the banner and the shield have a very very similar kind of palette. Like they have the same picture on them and everything. So it's kind of hard to sell different like the material on the banner as being, oh, it's cloth and then this is metal, when you've got two things that are kind of done the same way beside each other. It makes it easier to kind of poke holes in it. I think the most successful place for the banner for the black fabric is, for me, on his right hand side. There's like a letter that looks like a H that has been turned sideways. I don't know how to explain that better. And you've got this really nice light line going along there, and that looks super convincing. And then in a couple of other places, you were saying you had problems with the way the banners folded up, and yeah, that's fair enough. Like it's going to reflect light differently depending on how you look at it from, and it being such a three-dimensional shape is going to cause you issues. You could add in secondary highlights if you wanted in a different light source. You can kind of see them in some of your views of it, because the thing with this is you're going to have highlights on the peaks and the troughs of the wavy thing, because that's where it's perpendicular to the light. So you can see like in the kind of where the folds run through the dragon's head, the light in your room is creating like a light along the middle of the fold, because it's silk, and a silky material will be like that. Jim is your man for doing silky materials. He knows all about how to make something look like it's made out of silk. So he can probably fill you in on that a bit better. And then I'd also like to say, oh yeah, the face, you could maybe put a bit more life in it. Obviously, this is like a display army, but like a banner bearer is like a key model, and it's more likely that someone's going to pick it up and actually look at it. I think from this distance, it's fine, but like just to have a little bit of like redness to the lips or something to have a little bit of detail. I know it's a very small area. And I think the gem on his right shoulder, for some reason, doesn't look quite as good as all the rest of your gems. So just missed it or whatever, but I'm sure it'd be nothing to take it up a little bit of a notch. And also on the banner and all the freehand and the texture and things, like I totally feel your pain, because I hate the way these banners are done with like the freehand on it like sticking out, and you're like, that's not how banners work. Like it would be way easier if it was just flat and you could do your own thing on it. But I think it looks quite good the way it's done, and it's not easy to get this black fabric and NMM kind of gold thread going in through it. So like don't beat yourself up over it if you're worried about like the light not moving realistically with the model, like that's like impossible to do. To be honest with you, you have to kind of pick a side and just run with it. So yeah, thanks a million for submitting. I'll pass you over to the other guys.
Not too much left to be said, to be honest. You've covered quite a lot there.
Robin. Yeah.
For me, again, you've said it's high display sort of competition sort of aim, which means nitpicking. So Matt's already mentioned the face. The face feels, compared to the rest of it, a little bit slapdash. It feels like you've painted it with nowhere near as much care as the rest of the model. So just that little bit, the face is important. It might, even on an army, a competition army needs to have attention everywhere for it to sort of stand out amongst the crowd. The with things like your NMM and sort of the fabrics and stuff, it's going to easily stand out in across a competition sort of cabinet or table or whatever when the judges are doing their walk around and first cuts. But when they come to deciding what then actually places and what gets commended and what gets whatever, they're going to be picking them up and looking at them, and that face, it stands out as not quite as done. The other thing for me is the fabric. Matt, the whole time there, was referring to it as black fabric, and I think it is meant to be. But then on the sort of backside of the sort of banner, it feels almost, it feels like less black, more purple, more like a dark, rich purple fabric, because you've got so much of that highlight. If it is meant to be black, I would maybe tone that down a little bit. Not necessarily in terms of the color itself. I think you can have, black needs highlight. Not necessarily and if you're going for a sort of a really nice sort of silky look, I think that you need that. But I think the purple itself is a little bit either too saturated or too much of it in terms of that 50% black sort of concept, that it reads more as purple. I think it's beautiful, honestly. I think if you deviated away from black and went for that idea of it being a really nice rich dark royal purple, and you go with everything like the way you've painted the back of that banner, I think it would be really, really, really nice. I think that is the stronger side for me of the two sides of the banner. I think it's one of the nicest focal points on the back. You're giving that real strong attention where people don't tend to look, which is really nice, really, really nice. Then and again, it's sort of a similar color to the. I think the shield and the banner are meant to be the same color. The shield definitely looks black with a purple highlight, sort of a warmer, sort of a cooler sort of purple highlight, which is really nice. It is just that I'm a little bit confused on the color palette with that back looking so purple, but I think it looks really, really nice. So not a big deal. The only other one is the NMM on the spear. I think the back side of it looks really nice. I think the side that's sort of his facing sort of the front is a little bit. It just feels a little bit weaker. It's not weak by any chance, by any streak of the imagination. It's a nice, really nicely painted sort of NMM spearhead. Really nice colours. We've seen a lot of these high elves from you already, though, so I know you can do better than that one. In terms of the way that it feels a little bit not quite as to your normal sound. I mean, the other side of it is definitely up there. I think you might have just gone a little bit too harsh with the shadow hero. Is what I think what's making it feel a little bit off for me. But these are things that are crazy nitpicky because we kind of have to be when you're painting things that are this nice anyway. I think it's a really, really strong piece. I really like the glints as well. The texturing, like Matt said, is really, really nice. Overall, I think it's a really strong piece. So, Jim.
Only one thing left for me to say. Maybe two. On the last ones, we were very excited to see the interference colours in the helm. and steel. I think he did some in the sword as well of the magenta. So I think there's a nice chance for it here on this side of his helm. It is kind of in shadow a little bit more so than this side, but I think you could still get away with picking up some of that magenta in the side of his helm. Picking nits, don't get why there's magenta on his knuckles, and I don't get why there's magenta on this bit of the shield. I can't believe it's not deliberate, Robin, because you're so bloody good at painting. But if it's not, then competition level, we've got to tidy that up. And then I just thought that I was trying to visualize it. It's a bit of a tricky one because you want to unbalance, but the wood and the gold are very similar in tone. And this happened before with one of your bows, I think. There was a lot of browns on the horse, and you swapped it to having like a more of a like an off-white, like an ivory creamy bow, and it set the whole thing off, big style. So I'm just trying to visualize it now, just like painting that more of a whitey color. Would that be appropriate, or would it off balance a little bit? You might have to bring some over. It's a bit of a tricky one, so I don't know. Take that one with a pinch of salt. But in general, once again, your standard is very high. It's very, very nice. And congratulations on another stunning little high elf dude. Nice one, Robin. Thank you very much.
Sorry, Jim, if I could just interrupt there very briefly.
Yes.
What you could do is on the butt of the spear, if you made that steel instead of gold, then you don't have the same problem. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that could set it a bit. Yeah, I just meant like the gold that's in the banner on his around his face, like all the other gold. You know what I mean? It's just a bit. But yeah, down the bottom, yeah, there's another good example of it. So yeah. But like I say, I wouldn't want it to it wouldn't want to be like a super bright white because it'd be like, oh, I'm looking at a banner pole. But yeah, maybe just something to have a little play with, perhaps. Okay, I think this will be the last one, won't it? For this one, this is the halfway point. So Alexis will be the last one for today, but then everyone else will review next week. So first piece of the year, well done. What a stunner. Continues working on NMM. I'd like to get help and feedback on this point, please. Also trying to improve the photos. So I'll talk about the photos first. Perfect, I think. Well lit. Can't see any like gradient in the background, so you've obviously deliberately gone for blank white, and it's nice. No obvious cast shadow, so it's obviously well lit from all angles, and very diffused. It's in focus, even when I zoom right in. Yeah, great pictures, man. Very, very nice. I want some close-ups too. So, yeah, keep doing what you're doing with the pictures, man. Really, really nice. So, amazingly well painted demon. Congratulations. I love the red. That's got some very nice travel in it. Purpley shadows, like warmer orangey highlights. This is what I was saying earlier about going more towards the white or towards the orange. So orange has got a very demonic, fiery feel to it. So that's a good choice going this route here. Was a little bit confused as to the underside of his left arm. That looks kind of like you haven't finished it because it's kind of in the same light and situation as the bicep and the knuckles pretty much. Because he's in a very like general lit area, like he's got light coming from all directions as opposed to like one light source from one side. So I think you could bring this arm up to the same level as red or very close to it, is what you've done on the rest of the left arm. That would help a lot. As for the NMM, I think for the most part it's selling really nicely. You've got some good tones, you've got shadows, light lines, and all of the nice things going on. This axe head particularly. Soft contrast in it, but it definitely still sells as metal. So I'm really enjoying that. With this section on this axe blade, that's really hard, and I think you've done a good go at it. But I think when you've got like a flat metal piece that's kind of, when I say flat, I mean it's like it's perfect. The light is coming this way and hitting it like pretty much on the top. It's tilted ever so slightly, this one, so you could have like a band of highlight running across it. So you've kind of picked out the edges as the highlights, and then sort of put shadows. Like you can be random with it because light is random, but it looks nice when you've got a flat piece that's laying flat, to put like diagonal highlights on it. It's a good opportunity for secondary reflections as well. But this is a really tricky surface, and it still reads as like gold metal to me. So yeah, well done. I love the interference colors you've got in the axe as well. I forgot to say, like blue and like yellow and a bit of brown in there. So that's all really good. The bits that are facing down towards him, I think you could definitely get away with some of this red that's in the skin as an interference color to push the NMM. But yeah, like it's really nice NMM. I think you're really succeeding on it. You could maybe take some of the edge highlights a bit higher in some places, like the glints, but like minor thing, and it could be put down to preference as well, because it's really nice metal. It definitely sells. What else did I have for this guy? I really liked what you did with the horns, like having these like really sharp edges of it picked out and like drawing the attention, like framing his face in a rather different way, because you could have put like the white part of the horn closer to his head and have the dark bit away. But I think you've actually made the right choice here in having like the very bright lines like coming up to his face, if that makes sense, because the tips are now framing his face. You see what I mean? They make like a four-sided square, like around his head, and they are very bright. So I think he did the right thing there. It would have been overpowering if the horns were like white where they came out of his head. So I think that's like a really clever use of highlighting there to keep the attention where you want it. I really like what we did with the base. I have no idea if you built this or whether it's sculpted or what, but whatever. It looks very cool. I love that. The fire I thought could have a little bit more red tone in it. So it's like very orangey yellowy. And there's not like a clear hot spot to it. So it's kind of in the mid tones of where fire is. So a little bit more red, further away from the source of the heat, and then more towards yellowy white, and maybe a dash of very small white, pure white, right where the hottest part is. Would be really helpful. And then this speckly pattern that you did in the wings, I thought was a great success as well. So it doesn't look like you've tried to paint holes in it. It does actually look like a pattern, and I'm really enjoying that. It's a great way to add interest, because you got really nice colours in there anyway. But you just looked at that and went, I can do more than that, and you did, and it sells, and I think it looks great. So yeah, great stuff. Oh, and these glowy rune things on the back as well. Really cool. Last one, Alexis. Matt, get your name right this time, Matt.
That's fine. Yeah, no, great looking guy. It's obviously a big monster, and a lot of effort put into him. A lot of stuff going on as well. On the NMM gold on the axe thingy, I think one of the issues is like you have this. You've highlighted like the points of all these triangles, and that's like something that would happen if it was like a spear, but it's just a flat piece of metal that's in a triangle. So like both sides of the triangle wouldn't be highlighted because they're facing like it's just one flat piece of metal. Like it wouldn't collect light like that. I think probably it might help if you had all the rivets were picked out somehow. Like if you had a dark shadow around them, or to like script to maybe even just get rid of the rivets, because it looks strange on that surface that like there's like these little dots of the same color. Whereas in theory, like a metallic rivet is a sphere, so it gets like a really strong highlight and shadow around it. So that would kind of help with it. But again, think of it like a big flat plane. Flat planes are actually the hardest ones to do, and also the fact that it's broken up makes it harder as well. So it's a challenge, whatever way you do it. I thought that it's a little bit odd how he has like a red reflection on his right arm on the bracer thing, because the place where the reflection's happening is pointing away from him, so it couldn't be reflecting his skin. So I don't know what the deal is exactly with that. Like I like the idea of having some reflected interference colors, and I think the gold looks really good along his right bracer, but it's just kind of weird the way there's like a patch of it that's red. I don't know if it's like overspill or what happened there exactly. And I don't know if Jim already said it, but his face is like so good and characterful. It's almost like a bust, and the way you've got the light and the shadow going through it, where it's lit more on one side and less on the other side. Like that's a really nice touch, and you didn't need to do that. And like it looks great. It's just so much more interesting, and it's so it almost feels like the way you've done his teeth and everything, like he has like innards in there, like it's just vanishing into shadow, and it's just a great take on piece. So congratulations on that. Thanks a million for for submitting it as per the usual. Alex?
Yeah. So just on what you were saying about the face there, Matt, I think it is really, really nicely painted. I think it stands out really, really well. It properly pops itself out. My only complaint there is because you've got this such strong shadow on the face, it sort of tells me as a viewer that there's a sort of slightly forward camera right, quite strong light source, quite harsh light source that doesn't necessarily track across the rest of the model. It's almost as though the face is lit by a separate light source to the rest of the model, because everywhere else it's a little bit more of a diffused, sort of less directional light source. So it's not necessarily a complaint; it's more of a nitpick. I think having it be different almost makes it more impressive. It just doesn't quite fit with the rest of the sort of tracking there. But I think it's really, really nicely done. I really like the sort of, like Jim said, I really like the interference colors on the metals. I really like sort of how those have been painted. I think for me, a tiny bit more contrast wouldn't be amiss. It still sells as metal, but that little bit more just to glint it up, just that little bit. But overall, I think it's a really nice piece, really, really strong little demon dude. So well done.
Cool. So that takes us to the end of part 1 of this video. Thanks a million to everyone for submitting. And if we didn't get to your video or to your submission, we'll have it up hopefully end of next week, or as soon as we possibly can in the next part of the video. So we'll see you in that one.